She arrived in a black SUV at 11 o'clock at night, in the middle of a Montana thunderstorm, wearing heels that had no business being within 50 miles of a gravel road. Ethan Cross stood on his porch with a flashlight and a look on his face, like he was trying to decide whether to call the sheriff or just wait for the storm to sort it out. The woman who stepped out of that vehicle wasn't lost. She wasn't in trouble. Not the kind you call 911 for, anyway. She was Victoria Sterling, and she needed a husband. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The storm had been building since late afternoon. Ethan Cross could feel it the way ranchers learn to feel weather. Not from looking at the sky, necessarily, but from the way the air pressure changed, the way the cattle got restless in the lower pasture, the way his knees ached in the specific manner they only did before something big came in off the Rockies. He'd lived on this land his whole life, minus 3 years in Billings, that he didn't talk about much and tried not to think about at all. He knew this sky. He knew what it was about to do. He got his daughter, Lily, inside by 6, fed her the mac and cheese she'd been requesting since Monday, sat with her through half an episode of some cartoon she was obsessed with before she fell asleep against his arm on the couch, her mouth slightly open, one sock missing the way it always was by evening, regardless of how many times he put both of them on her feet. He carried her to bed, tucked her in, stood in the doorway of her room for a moment longer than necessary. That was a habit he'd developed after the divorce, standing in doorways, making sure things were still where he'd left them. He was back in the kitchen when the lights flickered. The generator out back kicked on automatically. He'd installed it 2 years ago after a winter storm took out the power for 5 days, and Lily had a fever the whole time. Money he couldn't really afford at the time. He did it anyway. He was pouring the last of a pot of coffee that had been sitting there since noon, not because it was good coffee at that point, because it wasn't, but because throwing it out felt wasteful, when he saw headlights through the kitchen window. Not headlights coming down the county road, headlights turning into his driveway. He set the mug down. Nobody came out this far on a night like this unless something was wrong. The nearest neighbor was Dale Hutchins, 4 miles east, and Dale drove a truck that Ethan could identify by sound alone. This was something else entirely. An SUV. Black or dark colored, hard to tell in the rain. The kind of vehicle that didn't belong on a gravel road, let alone a gravel road in a Montana thunderstorm at 11 at night. Ethan reached for his jacket and the flashlight hanging by the back door. He didn't reach for anything else, though his hand passed within a foot of the cabinet where he kept the shotgun. He wasn't that kind of alarmed. Not yet. He stepped out onto the porch just as the SUV's doors opened. 2 people got out. A man from the driver's side, but big, suit jacket, moved like he was used to standing next to someone important, scanning the area before the important person moved. He was already holding an umbrella that the wind immediately made useless. The second person stepped out of the rear passenger door. A woman. Heels. A coat that belonged in New York City or somewhere with actual sidewalks. Dark hair plastered to her forehead within 3 seconds of being outside. She looked at the rain like it had personally insulted her, and then she looked at the porch, and then she looked at Ethan, and whatever she'd expected to see when she got here, he apparently wasn't it. He wasn't sure what he'd expected either. "Ethan Cross?" she said. Her voice was steady, which was odd given the circumstances. "Yeah," he said. "I need to speak with you." He looked at her heels, looked at the mud between the SUV and the porch steps. "You're going to ruin those shoes," he said. "They're already ruined." She said it like it didn't matter, but the way she said it suggested it mattered a little. She made it to the porch without falling, which he gave her credit for. The big man with the useless umbrella stayed by the vehicle. "Victoria Sterling," she said, and held out her hand. He shook it. Her grip was firm, her hand was cold, and she looked him directly in the eyes in a way that was either impressive or slightly aggressive, depending on how you looked at it. He'd heard the name. Anybody with internet access had heard the name at some point. Sterling Foundation, Sterling Biotech, the Forbes profile. The Senate hearing 2 years back where she'd sat across from 3 senators and answered their questions in a tone that suggested she was doing them a favor by showing up. He'd seen maybe 30 seconds of it on someone else's phone and moved on with his life. He hadn't expected her to ever turn up on his porch. "What can I do for you, Ms. Sterling? Can we go inside?" He hesitated. Not because he was rude, because he had a sleeping 8-year-old in the back of the house, and a stranger on his porch who'd arrived at 11 at night in a storm and had not yet explained herself. "My daughter's asleep," he said. "I'll keep my voice down." He studied her for another second. She was soaking wet. She was clearly exhausted, the kind of exhausted that sits in the skin, not just the eyes. She wasn't carrying anything except a phone, and what looked like a thin folder tucked under one arm, now damp at the edges. "All right," he said, and opened the door. She stood in his kitchen and looked at it the way people look at things that are very different from what they're used to. Not badly, not judgmentally, as far as he could tell. Just taking it in. The wooden table that had been there since his parents' time, the mismatched chairs, the drawing Lily had taped to the refrigerator of what was apparently a horse, but looked more like a rectangular dog. He pulled out a chair for her. She sat down and set the damp folder on the table. "Coffee?" he asked. "Please." "It's old. I should warn you." "That's fine." He poured 2 mugs and sat across from her. She'd taken off the ruined heels and left them by the door without him asking, which he appreciated. She wrapped both hands around the mug and didn't drink from it right away, just held it. "I assume you're wondering how you ended up on my list," she said. The thought had crossed my mind. "Your brother-in-law, former brother-in-law, Marcus Webb. He works for my legal team." Ethan's jaw shifted slightly. "Marcus." Of course. He and Marcus had stayed on decent terms through the divorce, which was more than could be said for his relationship with most of that family. Marcus was a good lawyer and a generally decent human being who occasionally made questionable judgment calls, and apparently this was one of those times. "He told me about you," Victoria continued, "off the record. He said you were the most straightforward person he'd ever met in his life, and that you'd either say yes or you'd say no, and there wouldn't be any games either way." "He's right about that." "Good." She opened the folder. "Then I'll be straightforward too." What she laid out over the next 20 minutes was the kind of story Ethan associated with things he heard on the radio while driving to Billings and immediately forgot about because it had nothing to do with his life. Board disputes, foundation control, a man named Gerald Holt, 63, 22 years at the company, currently orchestrating what Victoria described as a calculated campaign to remove her from the leadership of a foundation her father had built from nothing. Court hearings, shareholder pressure, a public image narrative that was being crafted, piece by piece, to make her look like someone who shouldn't be trusted with her own family's legacy. She laid it out without flinching. No self-pity, no dramatic pauses, just facts, presented cleanly, with the specific detail of someone who had gone over it so many times it was starting to sound like someone else's story. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "And what exactly do you need from me?" She looked at him steadily. "I need a fiancé." The kitchen was quiet except for the rain hammering the windows. "A fiancé," he repeated, "a temporary one, 6 to 8 weeks, possibly less if the hearing goes the way I expect." She slid a page across the table. "There's a provision in my father's original foundation charter, an outdated one that nobody bothered to remove, that gives additional voting weight to leadership who demonstrate what the document calls settled family circumstances. Gerald's lawyers are using it. They've been feeding the media a narrative about my instability. If I walk into that hearing single, no roots, no family, it plays into everything they've been building." "You want to use my family," Ethan said. "Not accusatory, just clear. I want to pay you for the use of a narrative. I'm not asking for anything real." "How much?" She named a number. He didn't react visibly, but something went very still in him. That number was the difference between keeping this ranch and losing it. He'd been doing the math for 3 years. He knew the exact figure he needed. She'd somehow landed within $10,000 of it. "Marcus told you about the ranch situation," he said. "He mentioned it." "Of course he did." Ethan sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. An old water stain up there. He'd been meaning to deal with it. "I want to be clear about something," Victoria said. "I'm not asking you to lie about your character. I'm asking you to appear beside me. Attend 2 events, possibly 3, and be present at the hearing itself. You'd be yourself, a rancher, a father. It actually works better that way. The optics—" "I have a daughter," he said. "I know. She's 8 years old. She's already been through one disruption she didn't ask for. I'm not putting her in front of cameras and lawyers and whatever else comes with your world. I'd limit her exposure completely. You can't guarantee that. She didn't argue with that, which he respected. I can minimize it, she said, significantly. But you're right that I can't eliminate it entirely. He looked at the folder on the table, looked at her. She was watching him with the kind of patient focus that suggested she was used to negotiations and was willing to wait. I need to think about it, he said. I can give you until morning. I'll need longer than that. I have 4 days before I need to leave for New York. He nodded. She stood up, and he stood up because that was how he'd been raised. She put her heels back on, the ruined ones, and picked up her folder. Where are you staying? He asked. We drove up from Bozeman. We'll go back tonight. He looked at the window. The storm was still fully operational. That's a bad road in this weather, he said. We'll manage. There's a room, he said. I'm not saying that. I mean, the room's there, spare room. If the road's that bad, it would be... He stopped. This was becoming complicated in ways he didn't want it to become complicated. It's a practical offer. She looked at him for a moment. Then she glanced toward the window where the rain was doing what Montana rain does in June when it decides to be serious about things. I'll ask my driver, she said. The driver, she introduced him as Carl, which somehow did not fit him at all, slept in the SUV without complaint. Victoria took the spare room, which still had a stack of Lily's coloring books on the small dresser, because Lily treated every room in the house as a potential art studio. Ethan lay on his back in the dark for a long time, staring at the ceiling. The number she'd offered. He turned it over in his mind, not greedily but practically, the way he turned over every problem that had to do with this land. His father's land. His grandfather's before that. 3 generations of Crosses had worked these 400 acres, and he was in serious danger of being the one who lost it. Not from failure of effort, not from poor choices exactly, but from the particular bad timing of his divorce, coinciding with 2 consecutive drought years and a cattle market that hadn't treated small operations kindly. He could lose the ranch. He'd accepted that as a real possibility somewhere around 18 months ago. What he couldn't fully accept was what that would mean for Lily. This was the only home she knew. The horses were the only thing that reliably made her laugh since her mother left. His ex-wife, Dana, had left for Portland 2 years ago with a man who worked in tech and had a way of talking about things that made Ethan feel like he was standing outside a building he didn't have a key to. He didn't blame Dana, not really, or he'd worked hard enough at not blaming her that it amounted to the same thing. Their marriage had been a slow erosion rather than a collapse. 2 people who cared about very different things pretending for years they didn't until they couldn't. She called Lily on Sundays. Lily would sit on the porch steps with the phone pressed to her ear and tell her mother about the horses. And after she hung up, she'd be quiet for the rest of the evening. Ethan learned to just be in the room with her during that quiet, not trying to fill it. He thought about that now, lying in the dark, about what it would mean to bring another disruption into Lily's life, even a temporary one. He finally slept around 2 in the morning. I was up at 5:15, which was normal. He had coffee going and was doing the first pasture check when he came back inside and found Victoria Sterling sitting at his kitchen table with a mug of coffee she'd apparently helped herself to, wearing what looked like his sweatshirt, the gray one he'd left on the hook by the back door, over her blouse from the night before. She looked slightly less composed than she had at 11 the previous night, and somehow more like a real person for it. I hope this is okay, she said, indicating the sweatshirt. It's fine. He sat down across from her and they drank coffee in a silence that wasn't exactly comfortable but wasn't hostile either. How long have you been doing this alone? She asked eventually. 2 years, he said. Is it hard? He looked at her. Yeah, is that surprising? No, she said. I just didn't think you'd say yes that fast. I'm not here to perform. He refilled his mug. You asked. I answered. She looked at the window. The storm had cleared as Montana storms tend to do. Brutally, completely, like they were embarrassed about making all that fuss. The sky outside was that particular pale color it gets at 5 in the morning in summer, barely light but already clearly going to be a good day. Tell me more about Holt, Ethan said. She looked back at him. Whatever she'd expected him to ask, it apparently wasn't that. What do you want to know? What's he actually after? Not the foundation, not the charter. What does he actually want? She was quiet for a moment. Control, she said. He was with my father for 15 years. He genuinely believed that when my father died, he'd be the one running things. When my father left the foundation to me, he smiled at the funeral and started working against me the next week. Has he been waiting 2 years or longer? Longer. He started the moment he realized my father was serious about putting me in charge, about 4 years ago. So he's patient. Extremely. Then he's not doing this to win quickly. He's doing it to make sure you can't recover after. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite categorize. Most of my advisors didn't get to that conclusion until page 30 of their analysis. I don't do analysis, he said. I just watch how things move. Lily appeared at 7:15 in pajamas with horses on them. He'd noticed the pattern when he bought them and thought she'd find them babyish, but she'd worn them basically every night since. And she stopped in the kitchen doorway and stared at Victoria Sterling. Victoria stared back. Dad, Lily said, not taking her eyes off the guest. There's a woman in our kitchen. I noticed, Ethan said. Her name is Victoria. She needed somewhere to stay last night because of the storm. Lily came into the kitchen and stood next to Ethan's chair and continued examining Victoria with the particular directness only small children and very old people can get away with. Why are you wearing Dad's sweatshirt? She asked. Because mine was wet, Victoria said. Your shoes are by the door, Lily said. They look broken. They got ruined in the mud. We have boots, Lily said. Dad has extra ones. They're probably too big. That's okay. Lily seemed to find this answer acceptable. She climbed into her own chair and reached for the box of cereal that lived permanently on the table and began pouring it into a bowl. She ate 3 bites before looking back at Victoria. Do you know how to ride a horse? She asked. I've ridden twice, Victoria said. A long time ago. I wasn't very good. That's okay, Lily said. Dad wasn't good at first either. Lily, Ethan said. It's true. That's a family story, guest story. Lily considered this distinction, decided it was probably valid, and went back to her cereal. Ethan watched Victoria during this exchange. She didn't do the thing adults sometimes did with children, the slight performance of it, the dialed-up warmth that kids always see through. She just talked to Lily like she was a person at a table, which was apparently the correct approach, because Lily finished her cereal and before leaving to get dressed, asked Victoria if she wanted to see the horses before she left. Victoria said she'd like that very much. He watched them cross the yard toward the paddock 20 minutes later, his daughter and this woman who had arrived in a storm, and he felt something shift in his chest that he didn't spend a lot of time examining. Victoria left at 10. She gave him her card, which was heavier than a regular business card, some kind of thick matte stock, the kind of card that announces itself as different before you even read what it says. He put it on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker, where it sat looking out of place all day. Lily asked about her at dinner. Is she coming back? Maybe, he said. She was nice, Lily said. She didn't talk to me like I was little. You are a little. Dad. You're 8. She didn't talk to me like 8 was a problem. Lily pushed her food around on her plate. Aunt Carol talks to me like 8 is a problem. Ethan didn't argue with that. Carol did have a way of announcing Lily's age in conversation, as though it explained some kind of deficit. She said she'd never actually pet a horse before, Lily said, like actually up close. She lives in New York. They don't have horses in New York? Not the same kind. Lily seemed to think about this for a while. Then she said, she was scared of Jasper at first, but she stayed. Yeah? She held her hand out really still, like you taught me. She waited until he came to her. He didn't say anything. I think that was brave, Lily said, because she was nervous, but she did it anyway. He agreed quietly that it probably was. He called Marcus the next morning. You sent her here, Ethan said. Not angry, stating a fact. Ethan, without telling me, without asking if it was okay. I know, I should have called. Marcus paused. But I knew if I called you'd say no before I could explain. You're right. And now I've met her and I have to decide something I would have been better off not having to decide. The money's real, Marcus said. I know the money's real. The situation's real too. Holt's been going after her hard. It's not just a business thing, Ethan. I know what it is, Ethan said. I talked to her. Silence on the line. For how long? Marcus asked. She was here until 10 in the morning. She stayed the night? Spare room. He paused. And she wore my sweatshirt. There was a very long silence from Marcus's end, the kind of silence that contains a great deal of restrained commentary. Lily met her, Ethan said. Oh, Marcus said, don't make that sound like something. I didn't make it sound like anything. Marcus, I literally haven't said a word. Ethan stood at the fence, looking out at the north pasture. A couple of the horses were out there, moving slowly in the morning heat. He could see where the fence needed work in two places. There was always something needing work. If I do this, he said, there are conditions. Tell me what you need. I tell her myself. I call her directly. This goes through me, not through you. Absolutely. Lily doesn't get interviewed, photographed, or mentioned by name in any public statement without my explicit approval every single time. I'll have it in the contract. The moment I think Lily is being put at risk, the arrangement ends, regardless of where we are in the process. No penalty, no clause, nothing. It just ends. She'll agree to that. How do you know? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Because she asked me, before she came out there, whether you were a good father. And when I told her yes, she said that was the main thing she needed to know. Ethan didn't say anything. I'll text you her direct line, Marcus said. You call when you're ready. He held the phone for a while after they hung up, looking at the fence line, the horses, the land that had been in his family for 3 generations and was about to slip through his hands unless something changed. He thought about Lily's face at the paddock. She waited until he came to her. He thought about how much it cost, in a life spent keeping things steady, to stay still while something uncertain moved toward you. He made the call that afternoon, standing on the porch with the phone pressed to his ear. Victoria picked up on the second ring. I've thought about it, he said. A pause. And? There are conditions. Okay. My daughter comes first, full stop. Not as a talking point, not as a compromise position. First. If anything threatens that, we stop. Understood. I won't lie about my character. I won't pretend to be something I'm not. I'll show up, I'll stand beside you, but I'm not performing. That's actually what I need, she said. Someone who doesn't perform. And I want to understand what we're actually walking into. I'm not going in blind. You tell me everything, the hearing, Holt, the timeline, all of it. I can do that. He looked out at the north pasture. All right, he said. A beat. Okay, Victoria said, and for just a second, just a fraction of a second, her voice sounded less like a CEO and more like someone who'd been holding her breath and finally let it out. I'll come to New York, he said. Not Lily, not for the first trip, just me. You can show me what we're dealing with. When can you leave? He looked at the fence that needed fixing, looked at the card on the counter, looked at the drawing of the rectangular dog horse on the refrigerator. 3 days, he said. I need to make arrangements for Lily. 3 days is fine. One more thing, he said. Yes? That sweatshirt. I'd like it back when this is over. A pause. Then, very quietly, she laughed. A short, real laugh, not a performance of one. It sounded like something she didn't do very often. Deal, she said. He hung up and stood on the porch for a while, listening to the wind come down from the mountains, watching the horses move in the afternoon light. He'd made a decision. I was going to have to live with it now, whatever that meant. The flight from Bozeman to JFK was 4 hours and 20 minutes, and Ethan spent most of it looking out the window at nothing in particular. He'd flown twice before in his life, once for a cousin's wedding in Seattle, once to visit a college friend in Chicago who he'd since lost touch with. Both times he'd been mildly uncomfortable the entire trip, not from fear exactly, but from the sensation of being somewhere he didn't belong. He felt that now, in the window seat of a first-class cabin that Victoria's assistant had booked without asking about his preference, wearing the cleanest clothes he owned that weren't jeans. The jeans were in the bag in the overhead compartment. He'd bring them out eventually. He'd left Lily with his neighbor, Ruth Colby, who was 67 and had been watching Lily after school since the beginning and approached childcare the way she approached everything, steadily, without fuss, as though it were simply the next thing that needed doing. Lily had been fine about it. She'd given him a slightly longer hug than usual before he left, which he'd noticed but didn't comment on, and then she'd gone inside with Ruth and started talking about what they were going to bake. He thought about that hug for a while, somewhere over Wyoming. Victoria met him herself at the terminal. He'd expected Carl again, or some other driver-shaped person, but she was standing just past the security exit in a charcoal blazer and dark slacks, holding nothing, looking at her phone. She looked up when she saw him. And for a half second there was something on her face that was close to relief before it reorganized itself into the more composed expression he recognized. How was the flight? Fine. He fell into step beside her. You didn't need to come yourself. I know, I had a meeting that ended early. She said it like that was the full explanation, and he didn't push it. Carl was waiting outside with the car. The drive into Manhattan took 40 minutes in traffic, and Victoria spent most of it on her phone, one call after another, each one conducted in the careful, deliberate language of someone who had learned never to say anything over a phone that could be used against her later. Ethan watched the city materialize outside the window, the scale of it, the density, the way it seemed to generate its own weather in the form of exhaust heat and noise and sheer concentrated human activity. He'd been to New York once, a long time ago, for 2 days. He'd found it impressive and immediately wanted to go home. That feeling had not changed. I need to brief you before tomorrow, Victoria said when she hung up the last call. There's a dinner tonight. I'd originally planned to keep you away from anything public until next week, but one of the foundation board members, Ellen Park, who's on our side, specifically asked if she could meet you. I think it would help for you to meet her too. A test, he said. An introduction. Those are sometimes the same thing. She looked at him sideways. Are you going to be difficult about every step of this? I'm going to be honest about every step of this, he said. That's what you hired me for. She held his gaze for a moment, then turned back to her window. The dinner is at 8. It's not a public event? Private dining room, 4 people including us. Ellen and her husband Richard. They've been with the foundation since my father's time. She's cautious about me, but she's more cautious about Holt. Tonight is mostly about whether she trusts her own instincts. What do I need to know about her? She raised 3 kids largely on her own while her husband built a business. She has no tolerance for pretension. She'll ask you direct questions, and she'll be watching whether you think before you answer. And what do I tell her? About us? Victoria was quiet for a moment. We met through a mutual contact. We've been seeing each other for a few months. It wasn't planned. It happened the way things do when they're not supposed to. He looked at her. That's almost true. The best versions usually are. The hotel room was on the 38th floor with a view of the park that he recognized as something people paid significant money for and that left him personally unmoved. He'd slept in a tent at 10,000 feet in the Beartooth Mountains with nothing but a sleeping bag and a thermos of bad coffee, and that view had been genuinely extraordinary. This was a city seen from above. It was impressive in the way that a lot of things were impressive without mattering. He showered, changed into the one jacket he'd brought, a dark one, bought for a funeral 4 years ago and worn twice since, and looked at himself in the mirror for a moment. He looked exactly like what he was, a rancher from Montana in a funeral jacket. He didn't know how to look like anything else. He hoped Ellen Park appreciated honesty because she was going to get a great deal of it. Victoria knocked on the connecting door at 7:30. When he opened it, she looked at the jacket and then at him. That works, she said. You sound surprised. I wasn't sure what you'd... She stopped. It works, she said again. You look like you always look, he said, meaning it as straightforward observation. She looked slightly startled by that. What does that mean? You look like someone who runs things, he said, which I imagine is the point. She held his gaze for a second. Are you nervous? No. Most people are the first time. The money in that room doesn't change what we're doing or who I am, he said. Does it? She pressed her lips together slightly, not quite a smile. No, she said. I suppose it doesn't. Ellen Park was 71 and looked like someone who had made peace with exactly who she was sometime in her 60s and hadn't revisited the question since. She had sharp eyes and a direct handshake, and she asked Ethan, within the first 3 minutes of being introduced, whether he preferred bourbon or wine. Bourbon, he said. Good, she said. Richard drinks wine, and it means I have to drink wine too at these things, or it looks like I'm the problem. Now I don't have to. She handed him a glass that someone had apparently already prepared. Victoria tells me you have a ranch in Montana. I do. How many acres? 400, give or take. Cattle? Some. Mostly horses. Some beef cattle on the east side. My father had a farm, Ellen said, settling into her chair. Nothing like that. 40 acres in Pennsylvania. He went broke twice. She looked at him steadily. How close are you to going broke? Ellen, Victoria said very quietly. He can answer or he can't, Ellen said. I'm not being cruel. I'm asking because men who are comfortable with financial difficulty have different spines than men who've never had to think about money. Ethan looked at Ellen Park and decided he liked her. I'm 6 months from a forced sale if things don't change, he said. The ranch needs infrastructure investment I don't have liquid capital for. The last 2 years hit the cattle market hard, and I took drought losses the year before that. Ellen was quiet for a moment. Does it scare you? Every morning, he said, and then I do the work anyway. Ellen looked at Victoria, then she picked up her wine glass. All right, she said, in a tone that suggested something had been decided. Let's eat. Dinner was 2 hours of Ellen Park asking Ethan questions he hadn't expected and him answering them without preparation, which he gathered was the entire point. Her husband Richard was a quiet man who laughed easily and said relatively little but watched everything, and Ethan got the feeling that Richard and Ellen had developed, over 40 years of marriage, a shared system of evaluation that didn't require much verbal comparison. They talked about Montana, about Lily, briefly. Ethan gave them the basic fact of her age and her personality and didn't elaborate, and neither Ellen nor Richard pushed. They talked about the foundation, in terms general enough to be appropriate for a first dinner, and Ellen made 2 comments about Gerald Holt that were so precise and dry they landed like small detonations. Gerald has been the cleverest man in any room he's been in for 30 years, Ellen said at one point, looking at nothing in particular. The problem is that the rooms have been getting larger. Victoria caught Ethan's eye across the table. He gave her nothing back, but she apparently read something anyway, because a corner of her mouth moved. When Ellen excused herself briefly near the end of the evening, Richard leaned slightly toward Ethan and said, in the quiet voice of a man who has learned to say important things quickly, She's been worried about Victoria for 2 years. Not about the foundation, about Victoria. Ethan looked at him. Ellen knows what it looks like when someone's been carrying too much alone, Richard said. She did it herself for a long time before I was worth a damn to her. He picked up his wine glass. I'm just telling you what she's not going to say directly. Ethan didn't say anything, but he noted it. They took the car back to the hotel in something that wasn't quite silence. The city was doing its thing outside. People on sidewalks, lights, the whole permanent performance of New York at 10:30 on a weeknight. Victoria sat on her side of the car looking at her phone and then putting it down and then looking at it again. Ellen liked you, she said finally. I know. How do you know? She asked me hard questions, and then she poured me a second bourbon without checking whether I wanted one. People do that for people they've decided they trust. Victoria looked at him for a moment. You do that, she said. Read people. I watch, he said. I've always watched more than I talk. She turned back to the window. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it had weight in it. You've been carrying the foundation alone since your father died, he said. She stiffened slightly. Not much. Richard said something to you. Richard said something to me. She was quiet. He waited. He was good at waiting. My father died 26 months ago, she said. The hearing for the charter dispute is scheduled for 9 weeks from now. Between those 2 points has been the most sustained, organized, methodical campaign to dismantle everything I do that I could have imagined. She paused. I don't say that to generate sympathy. I say it because you asked. I didn't ask, he said. You implied. I stated a fact. You filled in the rest. She looked at him again, that sideways look. Marcus said you were straightforward. He did not adequately explain what that means in practice. People rarely do, he said. She made a sound that was close to a laugh and turned back to the window. The next 3 days were a sequence of situations Ethan had no framework for, navigated one at a time. There was a meeting with Victoria's legal team, 4 lawyers who had clearly been told to be calm and approachable and had achieved only a strained version of both. They asked him questions about his background, his relationship with Victoria, his public presence, and he answered them honestly and watched them write things down and occasionally exchange glances he wasn't meant to notice but did. He found the whole thing slightly tiring in the way he found most conversations about image and perception slightly tiring. The substance of a thing mattered. The presentation of it was a separate project he'd never cared much about. There was a lunch that turned out to be with a journalist from a financial outlet who Victoria introduced as a friend, and who was clearly doing a soft assessment of Ethan for a piece that hadn't been assigned yet, but would be. Ethan was polite and specific and gave no meaningful information, which seemed to frustrate the journalist in a way she tried not to show. After Victoria told him he'd done perfectly, he said he'd just been himself. She said that was what perfectly meant in this context. There was a morning where Victoria's schedule collapsed under the weight of 3 simultaneous crises, and Ethan spent 4 hours in the hotel by himself, which he found genuinely restorative, and then walked 40 blocks because the city was better on foot than from a car. He ended up near the water at some point, looking across at the other side of whatever that was, and called Lily. "How's Ruth's dog treating you?" he asked. "He sat on my feet for like an hour," Lily said. "My feet fell asleep." Occupational hazard. Dad, what does that mean? It means that's the price of having a dog sit on you. Oh. She was quiet for a second. When are you coming home? 4 more days. Is the trip okay? It's fine, he said. Different. Victoria's there? Yeah. Is she being nice to you? He looked out at the water. A ferry was crossing, slow and steady, not in a hurry about anything. She's been fine, he said. Ruth says that when someone's fine, it usually means something more complicated. He was quiet for a second. Ruth's pretty sharp. That's what I said, Lily said, with the satisfaction of someone whose observation has been confirmed. On the 4th day, everything changed register. Victoria had a shareholder call at noon, routine, she said, something that happened monthly. And Ethan sat in the outer office of her New York workspace while it happened because she'd asked if he wanted a tour, and he'd said yes, and they'd been in the middle of it when the call started. Her assistant, a very efficient young woman named Priya, who clearly ran the actual operations of Victoria's life with minimal credit, had set him up with coffee and a wall of windows that looked downtown. He heard the call go wrong from 30 feet away, through a closed door because Victoria's voice changed. Not loudly, the door muffled too much for that, but in register. The particular register of someone receiving information they weren't prepared for. She came out 12 minutes later. She looked entirely composed. Only her hands gave anything away, the way she held them at her sides very deliberately, which was different from how she normally held them. Problem? He said. A shareholder block I thought was neutral has moved to Holt's side. She said it evenly. 3 votes. It changes the math going into the hearing. How significantly? It means I no longer have a clear majority of supportive shareholders. I'm at a draw, effectively, if the hostile bloc stays unified. He looked at her. Sit down for a second. I'm fine. I didn't say you weren't fine. I said sit down. Something flickered across her face. Resistance, mostly. But she sat. Priya appeared briefly in a doorway, read the room, and disappeared. Who moved them? Ethan asked. I don't know yet. Best guess. She looked at the window. Holt has been very quiet for 3 weeks, she said. He hasn't made any public statements. He hasn't pushed through the media channels he was using in the fall. I was waiting, Ethan said. For what? For you to stop expecting him, he said. For your attention to go somewhere else. For you to feel like you were ahead. Her jaw shifted slightly. He knew about the hearing preparation. He knew I'd be focused on the legal side. Which means someone's been talking. She was very still for a moment. Yes, she said. Someone on your side. Yes. The room was quiet. How long have you been operating with a leak? He asked. She looked at him directly. I've suspected it for 3 months, she said. I haven't been able to confirm it. That's why you came to me through Marcus instead of through your own people. She didn't answer, which was an answer. He sat back and thought for a moment, looking at the ceiling, turning the pieces of it over the way he turned practical problems over. Not the legal complexity, because that wasn't his territory, but the underlying human geometry of it. Someone patient, waiting for the right moment. Someone with access. Someone who had been watching her long enough to understand when she was distracted. Your legal team, he said. How many of them have been with you for more than 2 years? 4. All 4 principals. Who brought in the 4th? Pause. Gerald Holt recommended him, she said. 4 years ago, when I was first... She stopped. He looked at her. 4 years ago. she said again, quietly. When I was first building the team. Before your father told him he wasn't getting control. Her eyes went very flat for a second. Not cold exactly, but the expression of someone realizing the shape of something they'd been circling without seeing directly. He planned it from the beginning, she said. Patient man, Ethan said. You said that before. I meant it before, too. She stood up. She walked to the window and stood with her back to him for a moment, looking at the city below, and he gave her that. The space of it, the minute of not being watched while she processed something that was genuinely a lot to process. What do I do with this? She said. You document everything you know. You separate your legal communications until you know which channel is clean, and you don't let him know you know. She turned around. And the shareholder block? That's a different problem. Who's in it? She named 3 names. He didn't recognize any of them. She explained the connections, briefly, efficiently, the way she'd explained the charter situation that first night at his kitchen table. And he listened, and at the end said, the middle one, the second name. What does she actually want? Victoria blinked. What? Holt offered her something. The other 2 probably moved with her because they follow her lead. What does she actually want that he could have offered? Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Recognition, she said slowly. She's been on the Foundation's advisory board for 6 years, and she's been functionally ignored because... She stopped. Because I didn't want to invest the time in the politics of it. There it is, he said. She can be moved back. If you do it fast and you do it genuinely, he said, not as a transaction, actually listen to her. Victoria was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite name, like she was recalibrating something. You've never run a company, she said. Never. You've never been in a boardroom or a shareholder meeting or so. No. So why are you right? He shrugged. I run a ranch. It's a different scale, but the physics are the same. People need to feel like what they do matters. When they stop feeling that, they move toward whoever makes them feel it again, even if that person's bad for them. She didn't say anything for a long moment. What? He said. Nothing. She picked up her phone. I need to make some calls. I figured. She paused at the door to her office. Ethan. Yeah. Thank you. She said it plainly, not as a performance. Don't thank me yet, he said. I could be wrong. You're not. You don't know that. My instincts say I do, she said, and went back into her office. He flew back to Montana on a Thursday morning, and by Friday afternoon he was in the North Pasture fixing the fence he'd been meaning to fix. And the entire New York trip had the slightly unreal quality of something that had happened to a version of him that lived in a parallel sequence of events. Ruth brought Lily home at 4:30. Lily came across the yard and climbed through the fence rails and stood next to him while he worked, not saying anything right away, just being present in the particular way she had when she wanted company, but not conversation. He worked for a while, and she handed him tools without being asked. Good trip? She said eventually. Productive, he said. Are you going back? Yes. When? About 10 days. We'll work around your school schedule. She was quiet for a moment. Will Victoria be here before you go? He looked at her sideways. Possibly. Why? I wanted to show her how Jasper takes the apple off your hand, Lily said. She didn't see that part. He turned back to the fence. He didn't say anything, but something in his chest did that thing again. The same thing it had done when he'd watched them cross the yard toward the paddock in the morning after the storm. He still wasn't spending a lot of time examining it, but he was aware of it. We'll see, he said. Okay, Lily said, and handed him the next tool without being asked. Victoria called him that evening. He was on the porch, with the last of the day's light going down behind the mountains, a condition that never got ordinary no matter how many times he saw it. How's Montana? She said. Still there, he said. How's New York? Still here. A pause. I spoke to Claire Ashton today. The second name. And? She's coming off the hostile block. Another pause. You were right. Good. I also did something you didn't suggest, she said. I removed the 4th lawyer from my primary legal team. Not fired. Moved to a different matter, where there's nothing sensitive. Quietly. You don't know for certain he's the leak, Ethan said. No, she said. But I know I can't afford to find out the expensive way. Fair. Silence on the line. A comfortable silence, which was interesting because 5 days ago it hadn't been. Lily asked about you, he said. A beat. She did? She wants to show you how Jasper takes an apple. I don't know what that means. You'll know it when you see it, he said. It's something she taught him. She's been working on it for a month. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Ethan. Yeah. Is this... Are we... She started again. Is this arrangement becoming a problem for her, seeing us together and then having me leave? He looked at the mountains going dark at their edges. She's tougher than she looks, he said. She's been through more than an 8-year-old should have to handle, and she's still handing things tools and watching the horses at dawn. She's going to be okay. That's not what I asked. He was quiet for a second. I know, he said. I don't have an answer to the real question yet. Okay, she said, quietly. That's honest. It's all I have, he said. I know, she said. It's more than most people give me. He watched the last of the light leave the sky over the mountains. It went the way it always did, faster than you expected, slower than you feared, and then suddenly gone, and you had no memory of the exact moment it went. I'll call when I have the travel details sorted, he said. I'll be here, she said. He stayed on the porch for a while after he hung up, not thinking about anything in particular, or telling himself he wasn't. The horses moved in the paddock below, dark shapes against the last light. Somewhere in the house, Lily was asleep. He'd made a deal with a woman he barely knew, for money he needed badly, to protect something neither of them had planned. He had no idea where it was going. That was, it turned out, the most honest thing about all of it. The second trip to New York was different from the first in ways that were hard to articulate but easy to feel. The first time, Ethan had been a stranger in someone else's world, moving carefully, taking inventory, trying to understand the terrain before committing any weight to it. This time, Priya knew his coffee order without asking. Carl nodded at him like a person he recognized rather than an asset he was transporting. Small things. But small things were how Ethan measured most of what mattered. Victoria met him at the office this time, rather than the airport. She was in the middle of something when he arrived. A conversation with two people who looked like lawyers but weren't her lawyers. Voices low, faces tight. And she looked up when he walked in, and something in her posture shifted, not dramatically, just a fraction of the held tension releasing. She wrapped up the conversation in 3 minutes and came across the room to him. Good flight? Same as the last one, he said. Carl has your bags. We have a thing at 6. Foundation benefit. Low-key, mostly internal donors. I should have warned you sooner. What do I wear? What you're wearing is fine. He looked down at himself. Dark shirt, the good jeans, the boots that weren't the ranch boots. You're sure? You'll look like you belong somewhere real, she said. That's the point. It had been 10 days since he'd left New York the first time. In those 10 days, they'd spoken every evening, calls that started as logistical updates and kept extending past the point where there was anything logistical left to discuss. He was aware of this. He didn't think she'd missed it either. Neither of them had mentioned it directly, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. The thing neither of them had said aloud was getting heavier. The benefit was held in a building that had clearly been something important 100 years ago and had been spending ever since on making sure everyone knew it. Ethan stood beside Victoria in a room full of people whose wealth was expressed in the specific quiet way of people who didn't need to advertise it, and he did what he was there to do. He stood, he shook hands, he answered questions without performing, he let the genuine version of himself take up space. He was introduced as her fiancé for the first time in a room full of people, by Victoria, in a tone so natural he almost forgot it wasn't true. Almost. A man named Douglas Farr, one of the Foundation's longtime donors, gripped Ethan's hand and pumped it twice and said, Montana, is that right? What part? And they ended up talking for 15 minutes about land management and water rights, and the specific misery of the cattle market in the last 3 years. And Douglas Farr looked, by the end of it, like a man who had found an unexpected pocket of fresh air at a party that badly needed some. Good man, Douglas told Victoria, not quietly enough, when Ethan stepped away briefly. Ethan heard it anyway. He looked back at Victoria. She was watching him with that expression again, the one he couldn't quite name, the one she got when she was recalibrating something. He looked away first. Gerald Holt arrived at 40 minutes into the event. Ethan didn't know who he was at first. He was aware of a change in the room's social temperature before he identified the source. A slight reorientation of postures, a few eyes tracking something. Victoria going very still at his side in the way she went still when she was deciding how to handle something. He wasn't invited, she said, quietly enough that only Ethan caught it. He came anyway, Ethan said, equally quiet. That's what he does. Ethan looked at Holt. 63, as advertised. Silver-haired, well-built in the way of men who'd been athletic in their 50s and maintained the appearance of it without quite maintaining the reality. He moved through the room with the ease of someone who had been in every version of this room for 30 years and felt no need to prove his right to be there. He was heading toward them. Victoria, Holt said, and the warmth in his voice was the particular warmth of someone who had long ago discovered that warmth was a weapon. You look wonderful, and this must be... He turned to Ethan with an expression of open, pleasant inquiry. I don't believe we've met. Ethan Cross, Ethan said and shook his hand. Holt's grip was firm and held a half-second too long, the kind of handshake that was testing something. Ethan held his gaze without making a production of it. Montana, Holt said. Victoria mentioned you'd been spending time out there. He said it in a tone that suggested Montana was a charming vacation location. What is it you do? I run a ranch, Ethan said. Horses? Horses and some cattle. Wonderful. The word landed with the specific weight of someone saying it about something they considered neither wonderful nor relevant. How long have you two been... Gerald, Victoria said, and the single word carried something that stopped him mid-sentence. Not loudly, not aggressively, just a clarity of intent that you either respected or didn't. Holt smiled. I was just getting acquainted. You were, she said. Now you have. There was a beat where the three of them stood in the specific geometry of two people who had been in conflict for 4 years, and one person who had walked into the middle of it without a map. I look forward to seeing more of you, Ethan, Holt said, and his eyes said the opposite of that, and he moved on into the room. Ethan watched him go. You handled that well, Holt said to someone across the room, and laughed at something, and several people laughed along because that was what people did with men like that. He's good, Ethan said. I know, Victoria said. He was testing me. Did you pass? I gave him nothing, Ethan said. So yes. She exhaled, a small, controlled sound. He felt her hand brush his arm briefly, and then she was greeting someone else, back in the performance of the evening, and he stood at her side and watched Holt work the room for the next hour with the patience of a man who had nowhere he needed to be. 2 days later, Lily flew in. Ethan had debated it for a long time. The original plan had been to keep her away from New York entirely, but the school had a long weekend and Ruth had a family thing in Denver, and the alternative was leaving Lily with people she didn't know as well. And more than that, more practically than that, Ethan had started to feel the particular guilt of a parent who was somewhere doing something his child couldn't see and therefore couldn't understand. He told Lily it was a work trip. He told her they'd see the city for 2 days and then come home. He told her Victoria would be around because it was her city. Lily listened to all of this and said, Can we go to Central Park? Yeah, he said, we can go to Central Park. Victoria met them at the hotel, and the interaction between her and Lily was the same as it had been in Montana. Direct, no performance, two people talking to each other rather than around each other. Lily had grown since the first meeting, or maybe she just carried herself differently now that she was on unfamiliar ground, and therefore paying closer attention. They went to the park on Saturday morning. It was a cool, clear day in that particular New York spring way where the light is sharp and everything looks slightly more vivid than it has any right to. Lily walked between them on the path, not holding either of their hands, which was her way. She didn't hold hands much, never had, as though physical contact was something she offered on her own terms, or not at all. She asked Victoria questions with the same directness she applied to everything. Do you like living in New York? I'm used to it, Victoria said. I'm not sure that's the same as liking it. What's the difference? Liking something means you'd choose it again if you could start over. Being used to it means it fits the shape of your life and you've stopped noticing whether it fits well. Lily thought about this for a while, walking. I like Montana, she said. I'd choose it again. I know, Victoria said. Your dad would too. Lily looked up at her. Would you? Victoria glanced at Ethan over the top of Lily's head. He kept his eyes forward. Ask me in a few months, Victoria said. Lily seemed satisfied with that as an answer. She went back to watching the park, spotting a dog here, a jogger there, cataloging things the way she did when a new environment was interesting enough to require full attention. They got hot dogs from a cart for lunch, which Ethan suspected cost more in Manhattan than a full meal would elsewhere, but decided not to calculate. Lily ate hers in 4 bites and asked if she could have another. After you finish that one, Ethan said. I did finish it. You finished it in 4 bites. That's still finishing it. It's aggressive finishing, Ethan said. Victoria was laughing, a real one, unguarded, the kind that came out when something caught you off guard. Lily looked pleased by the effect and ate the second hot dog slightly more slowly to demonstrate the capacity for moderation. He watched Victoria laugh and felt something tighten in his chest that had nothing to do with concern and everything to do with the other thing he'd been refusing to look at directly. It was Sunday evening, the day before they were supposed to fly home, when Marcus called. Ethan stepped out of the hotel room into the hallway to take it. Lily was watching something on the room's television. Victoria was in her own suite 2 floors up. Something's come out, Marcus said. His voice was careful in the way it got when he was delivering news he'd rather not be delivering. What kind of something? A photograph? It went to 3 outlets simultaneously about an hour ago. You and Victoria at the benefit on Thursday. The framing is, it's not good. Ethan was quiet. The headline reads, Sterling's Ranch Hand, CEO's Convenient Romance, Marcus said. They've got your name, your ranch, the financial situation. They know about the debt. The hallway was carpeted and quiet. Somewhere on another floor, an elevator arrived. How much do they know? Ethan said. Enough to ask the question they want to ask. They're not accusing you directly. They're framing it as a question. Is Victoria Sterling using a relationship to satisfy a charter clause? They've got enough context that readers will fill in the rest. Holt. Almost certainly. The photo's too well framed to be coincidental. It's cropped to make you look like a prop, not a person. Someone directed a photographer. Ethan stood in the hallway for a moment, looking at the carpet. Lily's name isn't in it, Marcus said. I checked that first. Okay. But Ethan, your ranch is named. Your debt level is described in general terms. If anyone starts pulling property records, I know, Ethan said. This was the risk. I know, Marcus. A pause. What do you need? Nothing right now. I need to think. He hung up and stood there for another minute. Then he went back into the room. Lily had fallen asleep against the pillow, mouth slightly open, one sock off again. He turned the television down but left it on because she slept better with some background noise, which was a thing he'd learned the hard way over 3 years of trial and error. He texted Victoria. Call me when you can. She called in 4 minutes. I saw it, she said. Okay. I'm so sorry. She said it with a specific flatness that meant she actually was. Not performing apologetic, just genuinely in it. This wasn't supposed to reach Lily or your ranch. It hasn't reached Lily, he said. The ranch is another thing. My communications team is already working on a response. I don't want a response, he said. I want to understand what just happened. Holt got the photograph placed. My team thinks through a secondary contact, not someone in my organization directly, someone adjacent who was at the event. He's accelerating, Ethan said. Yes. He's not worried about the hearing anymore. He's trying to end this before we get there. That's what my team thinks too. Ethan sat in the chair by the window. Below, the city was doing what it did, indifferent to any of this. Why now? He said. What changed? I moved Claire Ashton back to a neutral position, Victoria said. He knows he lost that vote. He knows the legal team restructure. Maybe not why, but he saw the change. He's realizing the things he was counting on aren't sitting where he left them. So he pushed early to rattle us. To rattle me, she said. He expected you'd back out. Ethan was quiet for a moment. The television murmured in the background. Lily shifted in her sleep. Will you? Victoria said, and her voice was very level in the way it got when she was controlling something. No, he said. A beat. You don't have to eat. I said no, he said. Not harshly, just clearly. I made a decision and I don't unmake decisions because someone puts my name in a headline. The silence on the line had a different texture than the silence that had been there in the first few days. The article will affect how some people look at you, she said. They'll think what Holt wants them to think. People think what they want, he said. I was caring about that around the time my marriage fell apart in front of people who thought they understood it. She didn't say anything. Lily goes home tomorrow as planned, he said. I stay for the rest of the week. We go forward. Ethan, unless you want to stop, he said. That's your call, not mine. I'm telling you where I stand. A long pause. I don't want to stop, she said quietly. Then we don't stop. He looked at Lily asleep on the bed. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. He hung up and sat in the chair for a while, not sleeping, watching his daughter breathe slowly in the television's low light. He had not signed up for a photograph and a headline. He had not signed up for his financial situation, described in public and general terms that were specific enough to sting. But he'd made a decision, and he looked at the cost of it, and he decided it was still a decision he stood behind. That was all he could do with it. Lily flew home the next day with a woman from Victoria's staff who Ethan had personally vetted over a 40-minute conversation and found competent and calm in the specific ways that mattered. Ruth would meet them in Bozeman. At the gate, Lily hugged him with the grip she used when she was working hard at not making something into a bigger deal than it needed to be. 4 more days, she said. 4 more days, he said. She pulled back and looked at him with the direct assessment she'd inherited from no one. It was purely hers. You're okay? She said. Yeah. You look tired. I am tired. Okay, she said. Like that was the most important thing to establish. She picked up her backpack. Tell Victoria I still want to show her the Apple thing. I'll tell her, he said. He watched her walk down the jetway, straight-backed, not looking behind her, and felt the particular combination of pride and worry that he suspected was just permanent now, baked into the structure of being her father. He turned back toward the city. The week that followed operated on 2 tracks simultaneously. On the surface, it was the schedule. 2 more donor meetings, a session with the legal team reviewing the hearing structure, a joint appearance at a Foundation Press event where Ethan stood at Victoria's side and fielded the questions directed at him with the same economy he'd applied to everything else. The article had circulated. People had opinions. He encountered those opinions in small ways, a held look a half beat too long, a question that wanted to be a different question, and addressed them the same way he addressed most things, which was to stand still and let them move around him. Underneath that, something else was moving, something that had been building since the first night in the kitchen and had been gaining weight with every phone call, every coffee, every sideways glance and unguarded laugh. Victoria was not easy to know. He understood that now in a way he hadn't at the beginning. She had been running on a kind of controlled efficiency for so long, managing perceptions, managing her own reactions, operating in an environment where almost everything had an angle, that the unguarded moments were genuinely rare. But they existed. He had been collecting them without meaning to. The way she'd held the coffee mug in his kitchen with both hands. The real laugh at the hot dog cart. The tone in her voice when she'd said, I don't want to stop on the phone Sunday night. He was honest with himself about what he was feeling. He'd always been honest with himself, even when he'd rather not have been. It was the same quality that had made the last year of his marriage painful in a slow, accurate way. He couldn't pretend he didn't see what he saw. He saw this. Thursday evening, the last night before he was scheduled to fly home, they had dinner in the small kitchen of Victoria's apartment, an actual apartment above the office, spare and functional in the way of someone who used a space rather than inhabited it, because she had said she was tired of restaurants, and he had said that was fine and meant it. She cooked badly. She acknowledged this without apology, which he respected, and they ate pasta that was slightly overcooked and a salad that was fine, and it was the most relaxed meal they'd had together because there was no room to perform. Claude's response was interrupted. Try again. The dinner ended the way. Those kinds of evenings tend to end when 2 people have been circling something for weeks and finally find themselves in a room with no audience and no agenda, slowly, without either of them quite deciding to let it go long. They'd moved from the kitchen to the living area, which had 2 chairs and a low table and not much else, and the conversation had gone through the hearing preparation and then passed it into territory that had nothing to do with foundations or shareholders or Gerald Holt. Victoria had talked about her father in a way she clearly didn't do often, not sentimentally, but with the particular precision of someone who had loved a person who was also genuinely complicated and had never resolved those two things into something simpler than what they were. Her father had built something real and been demanding about it, and never quite told her directly that he believed she could carry it, and she had spent the 4 years since his diagnosis trying to prove it to a man who was dying, and then to a memory, and now to a boardroom full of people who were looking for any reason to doubt it. Ethan had listened. He was good at listening. When she stopped talking, there was a silence that had some weight to it, and he said quietly, he knew. People who don't believe in someone don't give them the thing they worked hardest to build. She had looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at her hands. I know, she said. I just need someone else to say it. He'd flown home the next morning, and that sentence had come with him. The 3 weeks between that dinner and the hearing were the strangest of the whole arrangement, because the arrangement was doing something he hadn't anticipated. It was becoming harder to see where the arrangement ended. He still had the contract. It was in a folder in his desk drawer, and he was aware of it. The way you're aware of something you've put somewhere specific, not thinking about it actively, but knowing it's there. The terms were clear. The timeline was clear. The money, when it came, would go directly toward the mortgage situation and the fence line and the equipment repair that had been deferred for 2 years. All of that was still true. What was also true was that he spoke to Victoria every evening. What was also true was that she had driven up from Bozeman on a Thursday in early May, not for any logistical reason, nothing on the schedule, and spent the day at the ranch, and Lily had shown her the apple thing, and Ethan had stood at the fence watching Victoria hold her hand flat and still, while Jasper investigated her and eventually, in his own time, took the apple with the careful gentleness that large animals sometimes produce when they're making a decision in your favor. Victoria had turned around with an expression on her face that was somewhere between delighted and undone, and Ethan had felt something in his chest that had stopped being avoidable somewhere around week 3. Lily had been pleased in the specific way she got when something she'd worked on landed exactly as intended. He doesn't do that for everyone, she told Victoria seriously. I gathered, Victoria said. He did it for Dad pretty fast, Lily said. Faster than most people. What does that mean? Victoria asked. Lily shrugged, the effortless shrug of an 8-year-old transmitting maximum information with minimum words. Jasper knows, she said, and went back to the barn. Victoria had looked at Ethan. Your daughter, she said. I know, he said. I know, he said again. They'd stood at the fence in the late afternoon light and not said anything for a while, and that had been fine. Better than fine. It had been the most ordinary moment of the whole 6 weeks, and ordinary was, it turned out, the thing he valued more than almost anything else. She left before dinner. She had a call she couldn't move. She said goodbye to Lily first, then to Ethan, and the goodbye was slightly longer than the logistics required, and neither of them mentioned that. The revelation came from a direction Ethan hadn't expected. He'd been doing his own quiet reconstruction of the situation since that afternoon in Victoria's office when she'd named the 4th lawyer. Not investigation exactly. He had no resources for investigation and wouldn't have known where to begin, but the kind of lateral thinking he applied to problems on the ranch, which was to look at what behavior told you rather than what people said. He'd been thinking about the photograph. The framing Marcus had described, cropped to make Ethan look like a prop. That required someone at the event with access and direction, not a journalist who happened to be there. Someone placed. He'd been thinking about the timing. Holt's silence for 3 weeks before the shareholder block moved. The shareholder move coming the same week Ethan arrived in New York. Not before. Not after. The same week. Which meant Holt knew Ethan had arrived. Which meant someone had told him. He'd been turning this over for 2 weeks when he mentioned it on a call to Victoria, framed not as a conclusion, but as a question. Who, outside her immediate staff, knew the day he arrived the first time? She was quiet for a long time. The event list, she said, for the benefit. It was distributed to the foundation board 3 days before. All of them? All of them, she said, including the 3 who moved to Holt's block. Including Claire Ashton. Yes. A pause. But Claire has moved back. She wouldn't... Not Claire, Ethan said. Who do the other 2 talk to? Another long pause. I need to make some calls, she said. She called back 40 minutes later. Warren Briggs, she said. He's the second member of the block, the one who follows Claire's lead. He and Holt play golf. Twice a month, the same course in Westchester. It's been going on for at least 2 years. He's the bridge, Ethan said. He feeds Holt information about board sentiment, board scheduling, internal movements. She said it with a flatness that meant she was processing anger into something more useful. We've been handing Holt a map every time we send a board communication. Can you prove the golf connection? It's not hidden. They've been photographed there. I just never... She stopped. I never looked for it because I didn't think Warren was paying close enough attention to matter. Holt did, though, Ethan said. He spent 4 years building a pipeline inside my foundation, she said. And I missed it because I was too busy running the foundation to watch the people running alongside it. He heard something in her voice that wasn't quite defeat, but lived near it. The particular exhaustion of someone who has been working hard in a direction and discovered the problem was somewhere they weren't looking. Victoria, I'm fine. I know you are, he said, but stop for a second. She was quiet. You're not going to win this by going back and finding everything you should have seen, he said. That's not a useful direction. What's useful is what we do with what we have now, 4 days before the hearing. A pause. What do? We tell your lawyers. The team is restructured. Tell the new lead, the one you trust. All of it. Warren, the golf connection, the shareholder timing. Let them build it into the hearing strategy. It's not enough to prove Holt fabricated the scandal, she said. The charter challenge is based on documentation he filed. I know, he said. But it changes the context the board sees him in. It's not just a legal argument. You need them to understand what he is before they vote. Silence. What else? She said. You said you had a loyal insider, he said. Someone who's been on your side from the beginning and has access to Holt's operational history at the foundation. Yes, Sandra Reeves. She's been head of foundation operations for 9 years. She knew my father. Can Sandra document the timeline? Not accusations, just facts. When Holt was placed in certain meetings, when his influence on specific decisions happened, how his recommendations shifted after your father's diagnosis. She's been collecting that, Victoria said very quietly. For 2 years. I didn't know how to use it. Ethan was quiet for a moment. You have what you need, he said. You've had it. You just needed someone to tell you it was enough to use. And flew to New York 2 days before the hearing. This time there was no adjustment period, no taking inventory of an unfamiliar place. He knew the building, knew Priya's coffee order in return, knew which elevator was slower and which conference room ran cold. He'd crossed into the category of someone who'd been somewhere enough times to have opinions about it, and he wasn't sure when that had happened. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday. He arrived Tuesday evening. Victoria was in back-to-back sessions with her legal team, and he spent Tuesday night in the hotel going over what Marcus had sent him, a lay summary of the hearing structure, what each stage meant, what the board would be deciding, and on what grounds. He wasn't a lawyer. He didn't need to be. He needed to understand the shape of it well enough to stand in it without looking lost. He called Lily at 8. 2 more days, he said. I know, she said. Ruth's been teaching me how to make pie. How's that going? The first one was bad, Lily said. The crust went weird. Ruth said the butter was too warm. Did you eat it anyway? Obviously. Good philosophy, he said. A pause on the line. Dad, are you nervous? About what? About the thing you're helping Victoria with. He thought about how to answer that. He'd been doing a version of not lying to Lily about what exactly this was, which was different from lying to her but still sat in him like something imprecise. A little, he said. Why? Because it matters, he said. Things that matter make you nervous. She was quiet for a second. Is Victoria nervous? Probably. Does she act like it? No, he said. That's like you, Lily said. You never act nervous either, but your hands do this thing. She made a sound like she was demonstrating something he couldn't see. Like when you're holding something still. He didn't say anything. I like her, Dad, Lily said, in the direct declarative way she said things that she'd decided deserved to be said plainly. I know you do. Do you like her? The question sat in the phone line for a second. Yeah, he said. I do. Okay, Lily said, as though this confirmed something she'd already decided. Good night. Good night, Lil. Wednesday was the day everything accelerated. Ethan was in the hotel at 10 in the morning when his phone went, and it was Marcus, not Victoria, and Marcus's voice had that careful quality again. Something's come out, Marcus said. He sat down. What had come out was not another photograph. What had come out was documentation. 4 years of internal foundation records, selectively pulled and reframed, structured to tell a specific story about Victoria Sterling's leadership. Erratic decision-making. Overriding expert advice on 2 major grants. A personnel decision 3 years ago that had been contentious internally. All of it was real. Real decisions, real disagreements. But assembled the way you'd assemble a case against someone, cherry-picked and stripped of context, and it had gone to 2 financial press outlets and a legal trade publication simultaneously. He's going into tomorrow with this as the backdrop, Marcus said. I wants the board walking into that room having already read it. How bad is the coverage? Bad enough. The framing is that Victoria is a liability to the foundation's stability. That's the word they keep using. Stability. Directly targeting the charter argument. He knows she's been preparing, Ethan said. He knows Sandra has documentation. This is preemptive. That's our read too, Marcus said. Who leaked the internal records? We think Warren Briggs. He had access to all of it. Can that be proven before tomorrow? Maybe not proven, Marcus said, but the source trail is traceable if someone pushes it. Then push it, Ethan said, and get Victoria on the phone. Us. He walked to the Sterling building himself. 15 blocks. Because he needed to move. Because movement helped him think in a way that standing still sometimes didn't. He went over the architecture of it as he walked. Holt had spent 4 years building toward this. He had a pipeline, Warren Briggs, inside the foundation's board communications. He had someone adjacent to Victoria's legal team, the 4th lawyer, feeding him operational intelligence. He had been patient enough to wait until the specific moment when Victoria was most focused on the legal strategy and least watching the flanks. And now, the day before the hearing, he'd released the documentation to set the room's emotional temperature before the arguments began. It was a good plan, Ethan thought, genuinely good. It deserved to lose. Victoria was in the conference room with Sandra Reeves and 2 lawyers when he got there. She looked up when he walked in, and he saw it. The pressure of the last 12 hours sitting in the set of her jaw, the controlled quality of her movements. She was managing it. She was doing it well. But she'd been managing it for a long time. Sandra Reeves was a small woman in her early 60s with close-cropped silver hair and the particular stillness of someone who had been in high-stakes rooms for decades and had long stopped finding them impressive. She looked at Ethan when he sat down and gave him a single nod of acknowledgement. Everything we have is here, Sandra said, and tapped a stack of folders. 9 years of Holt's activity inside the foundation, where he was placed, who put him there, when his recommendations began diverging from the foundation's stated goals. I have email chains, meeting minutes, and 2 recorded conversations that I made in compliance with New York 2-party consent law. She said the last sentence like someone who had been very careful about the legal specifics for a long time. The email chains, Ethan said. What's in them? Coordination between Holt and Warren Briggs going back 26 months, Sandra said. Board sentiment reports sent to Holt's personal email the night before major votes. Twice. The lawyers were already reading. Victoria was looking at the table with the expression she had when she was very focused and very tired at the same time. Sandra, Ethan said. The 2 recorded conversations. Who are they with? One is with Warren Briggs, Sandra said. He was venting. He didn't know I was paying attention. And the second? Sandra looked at Victoria, then back at Ethan. Gerald Holt, she said. 18 months ago. He came to my office to tell me that Victoria would not last long in this position and that I should consider my position carefully. A beat. He didn't ask my permission to be threatening, so I didn't ask his permission to document it. The room was quiet. Ethan looked at Victoria. You didn't know about the second recording? Sandra came to me with it 6 months ago, Victoria said. I didn't use it because I couldn't figure out a way to introduce it that wasn't... That didn't look like you'd been building a case, Ethan said. Yes. You were trying to look like you had nothing to hide. I was trying to look like I wasn't the kind of person who records conversations in their own building, she said. He understood that. The optics of it. The difference between having ammunition and being seen as someone who needed it. The hearing isn't about optics tomorrow, he said. It's about what's true. You have documentation of a coordinated, multi-year campaign to remove you from your father's foundation using manipulated evidence and compromised information channels. He looked at the lawyers. Is that admissible? With proper foundation, yes, the lead lawyer said. She'd been scribbling notes for 3 minutes without stopping. We restructure the presentation around it. We're not just defending the charter claim. We're demonstrating the charter claim was manufactured. Can you do that by tomorrow morning? Ethan said. We'll be here all night, she said. Then we'll be here all night, he said, and looked at Victoria. She was looking at him with an expression that was past the recalibrating stage. It was something else now, something that sat more openly on her face than she probably intended. You don't need to stay, she said. This is legal work. I'm not here for the legal work, he said. She was quiet. He didn't say anything else because it didn't need more than that. They worked until 2 in the morning. The lawyers restructured the argument. Sandra walked them through the documentation in sequence, clear and methodical, 9 years of careful attention delivering its purpose. Priya appeared at intervals with food no one had asked for and coffee that everyone needed. At some point, Ethan moved to the periphery of the room and let the lawyers do what lawyers do, and he sat and watched Victoria work, the focused precision of her, the way she pushed back on the strategy when she saw a weakness, the way she asked questions that were always the right questions, even when she was running on 4 hours sleep and 2 days of sustained pressure. He thought about what Richard Park had said at that first dinner. Ellen knows what it looks like when someone's been carrying too much alone. She'd been carrying this for 2 years. The foundation, the conspiracy, the public narrative, the private grief of losing her father, and then having his life's work turned into a legal weapon against her. She'd been doing it with the controlled efficiency he'd initially read as coldness, and now understood was simply what competence looked like in a person who had no one to distribute the weight to. She was not cold. She was someone who had learned that warmth was a thing other people used against you, and was still figuring out how to be warm anyway. He understood that more than he expected to. Around midnight, they ordered food, and Sandra and the lawyers took a break in the outer. Claude's response was interrupted. Try again. Sandra Reeves had been sitting on that second recording for 18 months. She'd made it on a Tuesday afternoon in early spring, 2 years after Victoria's father died, on a day when Holt had come to her office unannounced, the way he always did things he wanted to look casual about, and sat down across from her desk, with the particular ease of a man who believed space belonged to him, regardless of whose name was on the door. She'd known what he was going to say before he said it. She'd worked in this building for 9 years, and she'd watched Gerald Holt operate for most of them, and by that point she'd developed the specific fluency of someone who has studied a predator long enough to anticipate its movements. She'd pressed record on her phone before he finished his opening sentence and set the phone face down on her desk, the way she always did when she was in a meeting and didn't want to be interrupted. He'd talked for 11 minutes. She'd let him talk. Victoria will not last long in this position. I want you to think carefully about where you stand when that happens. Your position here is something I can protect, Sandra, but only if you're standing on the right side when the time comes. She'd thanked him for his time and shown him out, and then sat alone in her office for 20 minutes, listening to the recording back twice, making sure it had caught everything it needed to catch. Then she'd locked her phone, put it in her desk drawer, and gone back to work. She'd brought it to Victoria 6 months later, and Victoria had looked at it the way you look at a weapon you're not sure you're willing to use, aware of what it could do, uncertain about what using it would make you. Sandra had understood that hesitation. Victoria was trying to win on the merits. She was trying to prove she deserved this without having to expose what had been done to her to get there. That was admirable, Sandra had thought at the time. It was also potentially fatal. She'd kept the file, and she'd kept building everything else alongside it, and she'd waited for the moment when Victoria would finally understand that fighting clean against someone fighting dirty was not principle. It was just losing slowly. That moment had apparently required a rancher from Montana to arrive. The boardroom on the 22nd floor was the kind of room that had been designed to feel permanent. Dark wood paneling, long table, chairs that had been there since the Foundation's first formal meeting and had been reupholstered twice since. The paintings on the walls were the kind that organizations acquire over decades, individually unremarkable, collectively suggesting a history that has earned the right to be taken seriously. Ethan sat against the wall in one of the observer chairs, and he looked at this room and thought, Holt has been in this room 100 times. He knows every person at that table. He knows which ones respond to pressure, and which ones respond to logic, and which ones respond to the appearance of authority. A man who has worked that room for 20 years has a significant advantage over a woman who has been working it for 4. The advantage Holt did not have was Sandra's 11 minutes. Patricia Osei called the hearing to order at 9:15. She was the kind of chair who ran a room through precision rather than volume, short sentences, clear expectations, no tolerance for theater. She read the formal statement of purpose and then turned the floor over to Holt's lead counsel, a man named Clifford Marsh, who had the practiced gravity of someone who had spent 30 years making things that weren't true sound plausible. Marsh opened with the charter argument, the founding documents, the stability provision, the framing that Victoria was temperamentally unsuited for the role her father had designated her for. He was good at it. He assembled the case the way skilled lawyers assemble cases, each piece interlocking, the logic appearing to lead only in one direction. He spent 20 minutes on the documentation that had been released to the press the day before, the internal records, the grant decisions, the personnel situation, and he framed each one in the specific language of concern rather than accusation, which was smarter than outright accusation, because concern requires no proof. Ethan watched the board during this. 7 faces showing nothing deliberate, 3 showing the subtle readjustment of people absorbing information they'd already seen in a different form. 1, a man in his 50s named Drummond, who had been vocal about governance concerns in the past, nodding along very slightly at 2 specific points, and 2 faces that told him what he actually needed to know. Ellen Park, who was watching Marsh with the expression of someone who has heard this kind of argument before and is waiting for it to finish, and Patricia Osei, who was watching everything and recording none of it visibly. When Marsh finished, Victoria's lead lawyer, Catherine Yoon, stood up. She was 44 and had the kind of thoroughness that didn't announce itself and didn't need to. She did not try to match Marsh's gravity. She opened a folder, set it on the table, and said, "The board has been presented with a case that something is wrong with Victoria Sterling's leadership. We're going to show you something different. We're going to show you where this case actually came from." She turned it over to Sandra. What Sandra did for the next 40 minutes was not emotional. It was not designed to be. It was a recounting, clear, sequential, documented at every step, of a man who had made a decision 4 years ago and built everything he needed to execute it with patience and precision. The first board communication sent to Holt's personal email before a vote, August, 26 months ago. The second one, November, same year. The golf course photographs. 12 instances over 22 months. Same course, same day of the week. Warren Briggs and Gerald Holt, publicly available location data from an event that had posted a group photograph on its member newsletter website, which Sandra had been quietly collecting. The timeline of the 4th lawyer's placement on Victoria's legal team, recommended by Holt, accepted in good faith, now reassigned, mapped against the dates of significant strategic information that had reached Holt before it should have. The board was not nodding along the way. Drummond had nodded along during Marsh's presentation. They were still. That particular quality of stillness that means something is being revised. Holt, at the far end of the table, was doing what he had always done, holding himself with the ease of the most comfortable man in the room. But his lawyer had opened a notepad and was writing something rapidly, and Holt glanced at it once and looked away, and that glance told Ethan the ease was costing him more than it usually did. Then Catherine Yoon said, "The board will now hear an audio recording, made in compliance with New York State recording law, dated 18 months ago." She pressed play. The room heard Gerald Holt's voice tell Sandra Reeves that Victoria would not last long, and that Sandra should think carefully about where she stood, and that he could protect her position if she stood on the right side. 11 minutes, edited to 4. The essential architecture of it. Nobody moved. Clifford Marsh said, into the silence, "We'd like to request verification of this recording's provenance before—" "The recording's provenance documentation is in the folders in front of you," Catherine said. Tab 7. She gave him a second. "The recording was made on Sandra Reeves' personal device. The metadata is intact. The device's service history is included. There is no tab 8 because there doesn't need to be." Holt spoke for the first time in an hour. His voice was even. "This is a significant misrepresentation of a private conversation that was—" "Gerald!" Patricia Osei did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Holt looked at her. "We'll take a recess," Patricia said. "On." The recess was supposed to be 15 minutes. It ran to 35. Ethan spent it in the corridor with Victoria and Catherine Yoon, who was already on her phone managing something else simultaneously in the specific manner of people who operate at full capacity as their baseline. Victoria was standing with her back against the wall, arms crossed, not talking. He stood beside her. "The board's reading the documentation right now," Catherine said, her hand covering the phone briefly. "Patricia is managing the room. Drummond has gone quiet, which is better than where he was an hour ago." Victoria didn't respond to this. She was somewhere internal. "Hey," Ethan said. She looked at him. "It's going well," he said. "I know," she said. "You don't look like you know." "I'm thinking about what happens if Patricia calls the vote, and we're still one short," she said, "if Drummond holds." "Drummond is not going to hold," Ethan said. "You can't know that." His body language changed on the third Sandra document, Ethan said. "Not on the recording, before it, on the email chains." He leaned back and crossed his arms, which is what people do when they're letting go of something they'd been holding. She looked at him for a long moment. "You watched his body language." "I watch everything," he said. "You know that." Something moved across her face. Not a smile exactly, something that was steadier than a smile. "Yeah," she said. "I know that." Catherine came off the phone. "They're reconvening," she said. So Patricia Osei called the vote at 11:47. The charter challenge required 9 votes, 2/3 of the 13-member board, to pass. Patricia read the names in alphabetical order and recorded the votes as they came. Ethan counted quietly, the way he counted things that mattered. The challenge got 4 votes. Drummond voted against it. When Patricia announced the result, challenge defeated, 9-4, Holt was already closing his folder. He did it neatly. He stacked his papers with the same methodical care he probably applied to everything, and Ethan thought, even now, he's managing the appearance of it. The appearance of a man who has lost a vote but not his composure, who will regroup and find another angle, who is not finished. Except that Patricia was still talking. "The board will now address a secondary matter," she said. "Based on documentation presented this morning, the board has sufficient cause to initiate a formal governance review of Mr. Holt's conduct as it pertains to his communications with Foundation board members and his use of confidential Foundation materials." A pause, measured and precise. "Pending that review, Mr. Holt's advisory role, board access credentials, and all communication privileges with Foundation staff will be suspended, effective at the close of this hearing today." The room had a quality to it now that was different from the stillness during Sandra's presentation. That had been the stillness of people taking something in. This was the stillness of people understanding that something was over. Holt stood. He said, "Patricia, I'd like to register my formal objection to the framing of—" "Noted," Patricia said. "The hearing is closed." Clifford Marsh put his hand on Holt's arm, briefly, in the way lawyers touch clients when they're communicating "stop talking now." Holt looked at the hand, looked at Marsh, looked at the room, at the board members, at Sandra Reeves with her 9 years of files, at Victoria, who was sitting very straight in her chair and looking back at him with an expression that was not triumphant and not unkind, just clear. He looked for a moment like what he was, a 63-year-old man who had spent 4 years building the wrong thing and had run out of room to build in. He left without looking at Ethan. Ethan had not expected to feel anything about that particular omission. He felt something anyway, a small, complicated something that had to do with the specific sadness of watching a person's worst qualities become their whole story. He let it pass. In the corridor afterward, Victoria stood against the wall with her eyes closed for exactly 15 seconds, and then she opened them and looked at Ethan. "It's done," she said. "It's done," he said. She exhaled. A long, complete breath, the kind you take when you've been unconsciously shallow breathing for a very long time and your body finally remembers it's allowed to do it properly. "I keep waiting to feel something larger," she said. "What do you feel?" She thought about it honestly. "Tired," she said. "And I don't know. Like I've been holding something heavy for so long that putting it down doesn't feel like relief yet. It just feels like my arms are still in the position of holding it." "That passes," he said. "Have you—" "Yeah," he said. It passes. She looked at him. When the ranch almost went, she said, when it was the most real. When I stopped pretending I could fix it alone, he said. That was the heaviest part. Putting that down took a while. She was quiet. Sandra came out of the boardroom and stopped in front of Victoria, and there was a moment between the two women that didn't require words. Sandra had carried something for 18 months and delivered it exactly when it was needed, and Victoria understood what that cost, and both of them knew it without making a thing of it. Thank you, Victoria said. Your father would have handled this himself and saved us all the trouble, Sandra said, which was the most Sandra Reeves way of expressing affection that Ethan had yet encountered. Victoria made a sound that was half laugh, half something else. He really would have. Sandra patted her hand once, firmly, in the manner of a woman who gives physical comfort rarely and means it fully when she does. Then she picked up her files and walked toward the elevator, already back to being the person who kept this place running. Catherine Yoon appeared with papers that needed signatures, because the work of winning is also paperwork, and Victoria signed what needed signing, and Ethan stood to the side and looked out the corridor window at a city that was doing what it always did. Indifferent, moving, loud even through the glass. And he thought about a kitchen in Montana with the lights on during a storm, and a woman he hadn't expected, and a decision he'd almost made differently. He was glad he hadn't made it differently. They ate lunch 2 blocks from the Sterling building at a place that was not impressive and not trying to be. A diner that had been on that corner for 40 years, according to the laminated sign near the register, which Ethan found appropriate. Catherine Yoon had gone on to the next thing. Priya had gone back to holding Victoria's world together from a desk 17 floors up. Marcus had sent a text that was 3 words. Told you, cross. Ethan had not responded to it yet. It was just the two of them at a table by the window, and the city moved past outside, and they ordered without looking at the menus the way people order at diners when they've already decided what they want. And the food came and they ate it, and neither of them tried to make the conversation something more significant than it was. What happens now? Ethan said. Now I have a foundation to run, Victoria said. The governance review will take a few weeks. I need to talk to Warren Briggs directly before the board does. Give him the chance to provide context, which I don't expect he'll take, but I'm not going to pretend the option wasn't there. She moved her coffee cup to the side. I'm going to ask Ellen Park to take on a more formal advisory role. She's been an informal one for years. She deserves the actual thing. She'll say yes, Ethan said. She'll pretend to think about it for a week, and then say yes, Victoria said. She does that, Richard told me. What about the public side, the articles? Those are being addressed. Catherine has a statement ready. The documentation from today becomes part of the public record, which handles most of the narrative. She paused. There will be people who don't update their opinion regardless. Holt has allies who've decided he can do no wrong. That's always going to be true. Does that bother you? She thought about it. Less than it did 6 months ago, she said. Something about having the actual truth documented makes the distortions easier to carry. He nodded. She looked at him across the table. And what about you? What about me? The ranch, the debt, the mortgage situation. The payment posts next week, he said. It was the first time he'd said it out loud, just flatly, without the slight bracing quality that had accompanied any thought about the ranch finances for 3 years. I had the bank meeting last month. We're restructured. The pressure's off for at least 2 years if I manage it right. You'll manage it right, she said. Probably, he said. I'll make mistakes along the way, but probably. She smiled, a real one, the one he'd been collecting since the hot dog cart in Central Park. There's something I need to say, she said. Okay. Properly. Not at midnight in a kitchen, which is where I started to say it. She put her hands flat on the table, a gesture he recognized as her version of centering herself. I came to your ranch 9 months ago with a plan. The plan was transactional. I needed something, and you had it, and I was prepared to pay for it, which is how I've solved most problems in my adult life. Pay well, get what you need, stay clean. He didn't say anything. I was not prepared for any of what actually happened, she said. I was not prepared for your kitchen, or your daughter, or your fence that needs fixing, or the way you stand in a room and just watch until you understand it. I was not prepared to feel like myself around someone again. I haven't felt like myself around someone in... She stopped. A long time. Victoria. I'm finishing, she said. He waited. I love you, she said, plain and direct, the same way she said everything that mattered. Not because of what you did for the hearing, not because of the contract or the agreement, or any of the logistics of how we started, because you held your hand out and waited for me to come to you, and you didn't change your grip when I did, and I have never in my life had someone do that for me exactly like that. He looked at her for a moment. At the morning after the verdict sitting on her face, the tiredness and the relief, and underneath all of it, something clear and open that hadn't been there 9 months ago. I love you too, he said. She pressed her lips together. I know, she said. I've known for a while. I just needed to say it properly. You say everything properly, he said. Not always, she said. Not about things that matter. I usually make those harder than they need to be. Yeah, he said, but you got there. She looked at him across the table with the expression she'd had when Jasper took the apple, that specific undone quality. And then she picked up her coffee, and the moment moved from the significant into the ordinary, which was where it needed to go. Outside, the city moved. Somewhere in Montana, Lily was in school learning something, and Ruth's dog was sitting on someone's feet, and the north pasture fence was holding. Well, she came to Montana 3 weeks later. She came on a Tuesday with one bag, which was different from the first visit when she'd come with nothing because she hadn't planned to stay, and different from the New York trips where she arrived with the structure of a life that required significant logistical support. One bag meant something. He didn't remark on it. She didn't explain it. Some things communicate more clearly without words. She stood in the driveway and looked at the ranch in the afternoon light of early November, and he stood beside her and let her look. It's the same, she said. Most things are, he said. That used to seem like a limitation, she said. Lately, it seems like the whole point. He looked at her sideways. New York finally wearing on you? New York is fine, she said. New York will always be fine. I know how to be in New York. She paused. I'm still learning how to be here. You're doing all right, he said. The fence repair last month nearly broke my thumb. You've got good technique now, he said. Ruth said so. Ruth is being diplomatic. Ruth is never diplomatic, he said. If Ruth said it, she meant it. She made the sound that meant she was deciding whether to argue about this and then deciding not to. He'd gotten good at that sound. Lily came home from school at 4:15 and crossed the yard and dropped her backpack at Victoria's feet and said, You're here, in the tone she reserved for things that met her expectations in a satisfying way. I'm here, Victoria said. For how long this time? 2 weeks, maybe more. Lily picked up her backpack and looked at the sky the way Ethan looked at the sky, reading it, assessing. It might snow, she said. I've been told the roof on the equipment shed is ready for it, Victoria said. Dad said the crew you sent did good work. The crew I sent said your dad supervised every single nail. He does that, Lily said. He supervised when they fixed the water line last spring, too. The guy with the orange vest got annoyed. Reasonable, Victoria said. Dad said he just wanted to make sure it was right. Also reasonable, Victoria said. Lily considered this. You take his side a lot now, she said. Not as a complaint, as an observation. He's usually right, Victoria said. Lily appeared to find this acceptable. She looked at Ethan. Can we have the soup tonight? The one Ruth taught me. If you start it before 5, he said. Deal, she said, and went inside. Victoria watched her go. She's taller, Victoria said. 3/4 of an inch since August, Ethan said. She measured herself on the doorframe. Did she mark it? In pencil. She wanted a ruler line, but I said that it had to be level first. That it had to be level first, he said. Victoria was smiling at nothing in particular. Did you measure it for her? Eventually, he said. How long did you hold out? 4 days, he said. She laughed. It was the real one, the one that came from the body rather than the face. The weeks that followed had friction in them, because real things do. Victoria restructured her schedule so that half her working time could be done from Montana, a decision her executive team received with the particular professional neutrality of people who had opinions about it and were choosing their moments. The remote structure worked, mostly. There were days when the time difference and the connectivity and the specific demands of running a multi-entity foundation collided badly, and she would emerge from 3 hours of back-to-back calls with the tight, controlled quality that meant she'd been managing something difficult and hadn't had room to be fully herself in it. On those evenings, Ethan would cook, badly, relative to a professional, adequately relative to what was needed. And Lily would do homework at the kitchen table and ask Victoria questions that had nothing to do with whatever had happened during the day. And the questions would gradually pull Victoria back into the room where they actually were, rather than the one she'd been in for the last 3 hours. He noticed this. He didn't name it. Some things work better when you don't frame them. There were also days when his world and hers failed to translate across the distance in the other direction. Days when he was dealing with the specific grinding reality of the ranch, the equipment that broke at the worst times, the veterinarian bills that arrived in clusters as though organized, the particular loneliness of hard physical work in cold weather when the result isn't visible until spring. And she would offer solutions that involved money in the way that people offer money when money is a thing they have in sufficient quantity to solve problems with, and he would hear the offer and have to work through his own resistance to it before he could receive it the way she meant it. They had a conversation about that in November that was the hardest conversation they had in those months. Not a fight, exactly. More a collision of two people's deeply held positions on what it meant to need help and what it meant to give it. "You do this thing," she said, "where you accept what I offer and then spend 2 weeks being quietly difficult about it." "I'm not difficult," he said. "You went out and reweighed all the estimates after the shed roof was done," she said. "You called the contractor back to verify the billing. That's standard practice. You did it because you needed to establish that you understood what had been done to your property," she said. "Which I understand. But it doesn't change the fact that you do this every time." He was quiet for a moment. "I have a hard time with it," he said. "I know you do. My whole adult life, the only thing between this ranch and losing it was whether I could solve the problems myself," he said. "Needing help felt like failing. I know that too. It doesn't just go away," he said, "even when the situation changes." "I know," she said. And then more quietly, "I have the same thing, just in a different direction." He looked at her. "For me, it's trust," she said. "Every time someone new comes close, there's a part of me running the old calculation. What are they getting from this? What's the angle? When does this become transactional?" She paused. "I've been doing it with you." "Still?" he said. "Less than before," she said. "But the instinct is still there. I notice it and I override it, but it's still the first thing that fires." He was quiet for a while, looking at the dark window, the ranch outside invisible, but present the way something is present when you know it's shaped by heart. "We're going to keep doing this," he said. "The same friction in different forms." "Probably," she said. "It doesn't fix itself just because we named it." "No," she said. "But naming it means we stop pretending it isn't there, which is most of the work." He looked at her. "I read that somewhere," she said. "Was it good advice?" "It's sitting in this kitchen at 11 at night being accurate," she said. "So I'd say yes." He made a sound that was close to a laugh. "Go to bed," he said. "You have calls at 7. "I know," she said. "So do you." "I don't have calls at 7. "You have the East Pasture at 6:30, which is worse," she said. He couldn't argue with that. Warren Briggs resigned from the foundation board in December, 2 weeks before the governance review concluded. He sent a letter that used the phrase "personal reasons" 4 times, which was the letter of a man who had been advised by counsel to say as little as possible. Holt's formal review resulted in a permanent bar from any advisory or consulting role with the foundation and the referral of specific conduct to appropriate oversight authorities for further review. Ethan learned about both of these developments via text from Victoria while he was fixing the water line at the far edge of the South Pasture in 12-degree weather, and he read the texts, put the phone back in his pocket, and finished fixing the water line. The ranch didn't stop needing maintenance just because other things resolved. That was the thing about land. It kept asking. You kept answering. That was the whole arrangement. That evening, Victoria told him that Ellen Park had officially accepted the senior advisory role. How long did she think about it?" he asked. 6 days, Victoria said. "She called it due diligence." Richard must have been entertained. "Richard sent me a text that said she already said yes on day 1, but don't tell her I told you." Ethan smiled at his coffee mug. He'd thought about calling Richard Park a few times, not for any specific reason, just in the way you think about calling people who understood something about the situation earlier than most. He'd put it off the way he put off most things that weren't urgent. He'd get to it. The first real snow came on a Saturday in late November, serious and committed, the way Montana snow comes when it's decided to be what it is. Ethan was up at 5:15, same as always, and the kitchen was still dark when he came in, and Victoria was already at the table with her coffee and his sweatshirt, the original gray one, the one that had traveled from Montana to New York and back and had long since stopped being just a sweatshirt and was now something else that neither of them had named. And she was looking out the window at the white yard. He poured coffee and sat across from her. Outside, the snow was still falling in the particular silent way of early morning snowfall, when there's no wind yet and the flakes come down individually rather than in sheets. And the whole thing has an almost deliberate quality, like the weather is trying to make a point slowly. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," he said. They sat with the snow and the coffee, and Lily still asleep in the back of the house, and the horses in the paddock standing in it like they always stood in the first snow. Not bothered, not delighted, just present, which was the horse position on most things. "I've been thinking," Victoria said. "About what?" "About the community investment in the county," she said. "The irrigation project is finished. The school program is running. I want to do something else, but I don't want to do it in the top-down way I usually do things." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I want to talk to people first," she said. "Ask what's actually needed rather than deciding from a distance what would help." She paused. "You know the county, you know the people. I don't, not really. I've been here 6 months, and I still only know the names of about 12 people." "Ruth knows everyone," he said. "I know," she said. "I've been thinking about talking to Ruth." He looked at her sideways. "Ruth will give you a very direct answer about what the county needs." "I'm counting on it," she said. "I've had enough indirect answers to last a while." He thought about this. About Victoria Sterling sitting with Ruth Colby in Ruth's kitchen, drinking Ruth's coffee, listening to what Ruth Colby thought needed fixing in a county that Victoria had landed in by way of a storm and a bad road and a decision that had changed both of their lives. He thought about how 9 months ago that image would have been impossible to assemble, and how now it was just the next reasonable thing. "She'll make you pie," he said. "Is that good?" "Ruth's pie is always good," he said. "Even the one she says went wrong." Victoria smiled at the window. "Lily's getting better at the crust, according to Ruth." "She still overbakes the edges," he said. "She says that's a preference, not an error." "It's an error she's claiming as a preference," he said. "That's what growing up is," Victoria said, "turning your errors into positions." He considered this. "That's either wise or a rationalization." "Probably both," she said. "Most things are." Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway at 7 in her horse pajamas, saw the snow, and said yes quietly to herself in the tone of someone whose expectations have been fully met. She poured cereal, sat down, looked at the two of them at the table, and said, "You're doing the morning coffee thing." "We're having coffee," Ethan said. "You always have coffee here in the morning when Victoria's here," Lily said. "It's a thing you do now." He did not argue with this because it was accurate. Lily ate 3 bites of cereal and then looked at Victoria. "Can we go to the upper field today? The one with the 3 mountains?" "After breakfast," Victoria said. "All 3 of us?" Victoria looked at Ethan. He looked at the window, at the snow still coming down soft and serious, at the mountains invisible behind the low clouds. "All 3 of us," he said. Lily nodded, satisfied, and went back to her cereal. This is what it looked like in the end. Not the boardroom, not the recording, not the headline, or the contract, or the storm that started it. It looked like a kitchen table in the morning with snow outside and coffee, going cold because nobody's in a hurry, and a child eating cereal and making plans, and 2 imperfect people who found each other late enough in their particular losses to understand what they'd found. There is a thing people say about love arriving when you stop looking for it. That's not quite right, in the experience of most people who've actually lived through it. It's more that love arrives when you've stopped pretending you don't need it, when you've gotten tired enough of the weight of standing alone that you finally actually put your hand out and hold it flat and stay still. Ethan Cross had spent 3 years learning that the ranch needed him, and his daughter needed him, and that needing anything back was a risk he could manage without taking. Victoria Sterling had spent 4 years learning that every person who came close to her had an angle, and that the only safe position was to stay far enough back from everyone that their angles couldn't find her. Neither of those learned things were wrong, exactly. They were built from real experience, and they were doing the job they were built to do. The problem is that a protection that works perfectly is still a wall, and walls that work perfectly don't let anything through in either direction. What brought them through the wall was not love first. It was something smaller and more durable. It was honesty. His habit of saying the true thing regardless of how it landed. Her willingness to hear it once she understood it wasn't a weapon. The rest followed from that slowly, imperfectly, in the way that things follow when the foundation is actually sound. They went to the upper field that afternoon, all three of them, through snow that came to the tops of Lily's boots and made Victoria's borrowed pair squeak with every step. The clouds had lifted by early afternoon the way they often do after a morning snowfall, and the mountains appeared one by one. First the nearest one, then the middle distance, then the far one, all three visible and clear and white-capped in the specific bright way of mountains after fresh snow. Lily stood between them and named all three peaks for Victoria's benefit, the names she'd learned from her father, using the slightly formal tone she used when she was passing on information she considered important. Victoria listened and looked and asked the right questions. Ethan stood beside them both and thought about something Sandra Reeves had said to him, quietly, as they were leaving the hearing building. Not Victoria's foundation, just the building itself, the corridor, the part between one thing and the next. She'd said, "Your father's name is Ethan too?" He'd said yes, surprised she knew that. She'd said, "Your father's name is in the County Historical Society's land registry. Your grandfather's before him." That's a long line of people deciding something was worth staying for. He hadn't known what to say to that, so he just said yes, which was true and was enough. He thought about that now, about the long line of people deciding something was worth staying for, about what got added to that line by the particular decisions of the last 9 months. Not just his, but hers too, the decision she'd made to stay in the hard thing rather than exit cleanly, to trust. Despite the history of what trust had cost her, to put her hand out flat and wait. The mountain sat there in the November light and did what mountains do, which is to make the immediate distance feel smaller without making it feel less real. "Which one is the farthest?" Victoria asked Lily. Lily pointed. "That one. You can see it from the upper pasture sometimes in summer, but usually there's haze." "How far is it?" "Dad knows," Lily said. "About 40 miles, Ethan said." Victoria looked at 40 miles of clear winter air between where they stood and that mountain. "You can see 40 miles from your backyard," she said. "Yeah," he said. "That's—" She stopped. "I don't have a word for that." "Most people don't," he said. "That's kind of the point." She looked at him. Snow on her jacket, on the borrowed boots, in her hair from a branch Lily had shaken very deliberately, approximately 15 minutes ago, and pretended was an accident. She looked entirely unlike the woman who had arrived in a black SUV on a storm-soaked gravel road 9 months ago. And she looked exactly like the same person, and both of those things were true at the same time. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For saying yes," she said. "When you could have said no." He thought about the folder in the desk drawer, the contract, the money, the fence that needed fixing and the roof that needed replacing, and a daughter asleep against his arm with one sock off. He thought about a woman holding her hand out flat and waiting, and a horse that already knew. "Thank you for asking," he said. Lily said from 3 feet ahead of them on the path without turning around, "Are you two doing the talking thing again?" "Yes," they said at the same time. "Okay," she said, and kept walking through the snow toward the far tree line, her boots squeaking with every step, absolutely certain of where she was going. They followed her. That was enough. That was in fact everything.